We are now going to show you a video produced by the Alzheimer Society to help explain what is Alzheimer's disease.
So we are going to recap on the video that you have just watched on Alzheimer's disease. We've known about Alzheimer's for a long time, and it was in fact first described as far back as 1907. However, there's still a lot to be learnt about the disease and a lot more research is needed. But what we do know is that there is a build-up of plaques and tangles in the brain of people with Alzheimer's disease. And these plaques and tangles contain proteins called amyloid and tau. These seem to cause damage to certain areas of the brain and in particular affects the levels of certain chemicals that are involved in sending messages from one brain cell to another. They were called on the video neurotransmitters, and there's one in particular that's implicated in Alzheimer's, and what we know is that the levels of a certain chemical called acetylcholine seems to diminish. And this particularly happens in the area of the brain that makes new memories, in the hippocampus. What we also heard is that in Alzheimer's there tends to be a gradual decline in function, which tends to not fluctuate from day to day.
This next slide shows what happens at cell level in the brain. The bottom of the screen shows a healthy brain cell or neuron. As you can see, there are 3 brain cells with long fibres which connect between the cells and allow messages to be transmitted or passed along. Then there is the picture above labelled Alzheimer's cells. As you can see, there are the same triangular shaped cells, but on this slide you can see these big clumps or plaques of amyloid sitting outside of the brain cells. And the effect of these is that they cause the brain cells to die off. And physically, if we were to look at the brain, as brain cells die off, the actual size of the brain reduces simply because there are less brain cells. On the right-hand side, there is a cross-section of a brain, and the picture shows the comparison between a normal healthy brain and advanced Alzheimer's disease. So you can see the actual substance of the brain is smaller, and that is because there are less brain cells.
We're now going to move on to another video clip on vascular dementia.
Vascular dementia is caused by damage to the blood vessels which supply the brain. This results in areas of the brain not getting oxygen and nutrients that it needs, such as glucose, and consequently brain cells start to die off. The progression tends to be stepwise, but it can be quite difficult to predict how big or small these steps will be, and therefore to say how quickly or slowly vascular dementia will progress. There are a number of key symptoms. Memory loss and difficulty with concentration is common, but people can also experience language difficulties, struggling initially with finding and recalling words and names. People can also experience depression or mood swings, with irritability or reduced motivation being quite common. There can also be associated physical problems such as unsteadiness or incontinence. And all of these symptoms can fluctuate day to day.
Here is the picture of the blood supply to the brain. So someone is looking sideways, there's an artery running up through the neck, and in the head it starts to branch, and it keeps branching a bit like a tree. Vascular dementia can be caused when there's a blockage in one of the branches of this main artery. So if it's in a medium-sized branch, then there would be stroke damage. Equally, the very, very tiny blood vessels that supply the brain, so thinking of the tree analogy, the twigs, if they have blockages, then this is the cause of small vessel disease. You are more likely to develop vascular dementia if you have one of the conditions which can lead to blocked arteries. So these are things like high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, and smoking. The video that we are going to show you now is on dementia with Lewy bodies.
Dementia with Lewy bodies is an illness related to Parkinson's disease. In Parkinson's, the areas of the brain affected are mainly areas which regulate movement. In dementia with Lewy bodies, more areas of the brain are affected. Proteins called Lewy bodies build up inside nerve cells within the brain in areas which control thinking, memory, visual interpretation, as well as movement. People with dementia with Lewy bodies frequently present with a unique cluster of symptoms. They can have episodes of confusion which are quite fluctuating, sometimes with people appearing at times very lucid to then very confused, and these changes in some people can be from hour to hour. They are likely to have some of the movement features of Parkinson's disease. They may be slower in their movements and walking, and have muscle stiffness, perhaps shakiness, usually in their hands and arms. They may experience visual hallucinations, so seeing things that others can't see and things that aren't really there. Commonly, they report seeing small animals or people, or they can misinterpret actual things that they can see, such as thinking that a cushion is a cat. These are common diagnostic features of dementia with Lewy bodies. People can also have sleep disturbance, and this can be quite common. There is a condition called REM sleep disorder. REM stands for rapid eye movement, which is a phase of our sleep cycle. People with REM sleep disorder often talk in their sleep or get up and act on their dreams, and they often have excessive sleepiness during the day. And finally, people can have unsteadiness, falls, and are prone to fainting. Because there is an overlap in symptoms, how do we work out whether someone has Parkinson's disease dementia or dementia with Lewy bodies? Well, it's a bit arbitrary, but if cognitive symptoms such as the fluctuating confusion or hallucinations occur 1 year before any motor symptoms, we call it dementia with Lewy bodies. If, however, people have the typical symptoms of Parkinson's disease first, so maybe shakiness, rigidity and slowing of movements, and then the cognitive symptoms emerge over a year or more later, then this would be classified as Parkinson's disease dementia.
We are now going to show you a short video about frontotemporal dementia. So frontotemporal dementia mainly affects younger people, so it tends to start in someone's 50s or 60s. And what happens is that a protein called tau gets deposited in the brain cells in the frontal and temporal regions of the brain, and this causes cells to die off. Symptoms can include personality and behavioural changes and problems with speech, and certainly early on in the illness, memory is relatively spared, so it's often not the first thing that someone will present with. There are three types of frontotemporal dementia. There's a behavioural variant, and this really presents with changes in personality. So a person who is quiet and polite could become over time very outspoken, irritable and disinhibited. They may make irrational and out of character decisions. Conversely, an outgoing person could become withdrawn and disinterested and start to neglect themselves. Semantic dementia is a variant of frontotemporal dementia, and the problem here is with the understanding of language, what words mean, and memory for facts. You may notice that someone with semantic dementia has rather vague or over-detailed speech. They don't really get to the point. And then the third variant is progressive non-fluent aphasia. And with this, there is early and prominent difficulty with speech and getting the words out. We thought we'd spend just a little bit of time talking about late, in case you've read about it or heard about it on the news last year. So late stands for limbic-predominant age-related encephalopathy. People present very much like someone with Alzheimer's disease, as memory and thinking are affected. In fact, it really mimics Alzheimer's disease. The difference is that a different protein is implicated. So we've talked about how in Alzheimer's disease, amyloid and tau proteins get deposited in the brain. In late, it's a different protein called TDP43. It is thought that late affects about 20% of people over the age of 80, so there may be people that are being misdiagnosed as having Alzheimer's disease. Because it's a different protein and cause, it may explain why some people diagnosed with Alzheimer's in fact don't respond so well to the standard treatments, the medication treatments, or even why people don't respond to some of the research trials. So it's quite a difficult situation. We don't have any clinical markers to pick up late at the moment, but research is ongoing. So essentially the only way we know about late is through post-mortem samples of brain tissue. So we've tried to concentrate on the more common forms of dementia, but there are a number of even rarer types which are listed here. So things like corticobasal degeneration, where people can have cognitive impairment, but also quite significant impairment of mobility, and it affects their limbs and the use of their limbs. AIDS-related dementia is becoming increasingly prevalent. Things like Huntington's disease can affect people's cognition, multiple sclerosis. Korsakoff's syndrome is caused by excessive alcohol usage over the years, and people become very, very forgetful. There's something called normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is due to pressure effects in the brain, and this can affect people's memory, the way that they walk, and can cause some incontinence. It's important to pick this up because people can have a shunt and those symptoms can improve. Posterior cortical atrophy is often caused by the changes that we see in Alzheimer's, but most of the symptoms are due to the cell loss in the back of the brain. And there's something called progressive supranuclear palsy, which has an overlap with Parkinson's disease and frontotemporal dementia. So as you've seen and heard, Dementia can present in many different forms and with quite varied symptoms and signs. So how do we reach a diagnosis? At the memory clinic, we take a careful history from the person with memory or language difficulties, and importantly from someone who knows them well. Important clues are what was first noticed, how have things progressed so far, and what is the impact on the person's day-to-day functioning. We ask GPs in advance to perform blood tests so that we can check and exclude illnesses such as anemia, thyroid disease, and certain vitamin deficiencies which can cause cognitive problems. We carry out cognitive testing to assess different areas of brain function and strengths and weaknesses, and we'll look at brain scans. And putting all that information together, we arrive at a probable diagnosis. So we're going to take our next break now, so that we can answer questions and arrive at some discussion points. And in particular, what we'd like to talk about is, should we tell the patient their diagnosis?